The village church had stood for centuries, its stone walls weathered but unbroken, its bell tower ringing through countless weddings. Among the townspeople, there was one tale whispered in hushed tones, the story of Evelyn, the bride who never left her wedding day. Evelyn was the daughter of a wealthy merchant in the 1800s, admired for her beauty and kindness. On her wedding day, she wore a gown of white satin, with lace embroidered by her mother's hands. The church was filled with candlelight, and the scent of lilies hung in the air. But her groom, Thomas, never arrived. He had vanished on his way, his carriage found overturned near the woods, the horses missing, and Thomas gone without a trace. The guests waited, then murmured, then left. Evelyn, in shock, stood at the altar, still clutching her bouquet. Hours turned to days, and days to weeks. She refused to remove her gown, insisting Thomas would return for her. One night, she locked herself inside the church, and by morning, she was found lifeless before the altar, her bouquet wilted in her hand. Since then, couples who marry in that same church tell of a presence. Some brides have felt the brush of a veil against their face, when they weren't wearing one. Others report the smell of lilies choking the air, or faint sobbing echoing from the empty pews. The priest himself once locked up, after a ceremony, and swore he saw a figure in a wedding gown kneeling at the altar, head bowed, bouquet clutched tightly. The most terrifying account came from a couple, Sarah and James, who decided to marry there despite the warnings. During the vows, Sarah's veil was tugged backward, though no one stood behind her. The air grew icy cold, and when James slid the ring onto her finger, Sarah gasped, because there was already another ring there, an old tarnished band she had never seen before. The guests panicked, whispering and pointing. The priest froze mid-verse. Then Sarah saw her reflection in the polished chalice by the altar. Behind her stood Evelyn, her hollow eyes staring out from under her decayed bridal veil. That night, Sarah woke screaming in the honeymoon suite. Her dress was missing from the closet. On the bed lay an ancient, yellowed wedding gown with Evelyn's name stitched into the collar. James burned it immediately, but Sarah swore that when she closed her eyes, she could still hear a whisper, "You took my place." No one marries in that church anymore. But locals say, on stormy nights, a faint figure in white paces slowly up the aisle, waiting for a groom who will never come. It was the perfect wedding. Sunlight poured through the garden, laughter echoed across the tables, and music drifted in the breeze. Emma and Daniel had spared no expense. Everyone they loved was there. Or at least, they thought. Halfway through the reception, Emma noticed her maid of honor looking unsettled. "Who's that woman?" she whispered, nodding toward a guest in the corner. She was dressed in black, out of place among the colorful dresses. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark, and her smile too wide. Emma scanned the crowd, confused. She didn't remember inviting her, and neither did Daniel. But the stranger seemed comfortable, sipping wine, chatting briefly with people who quickly excused themselves with pale faces. As the evening went on, the woman moved closer to the bride. Every time Emma looked up, she was nearer, first by the buffet, then by the dance floor, then standing among the bridesmaids as if she belonged there. Nobody questioned it aloud, though several guests left early without explanation. During the cake cutting, Emma's hand trembled. The woman in black stood directly behind Daniel, her breath brushing his ear, though he seemed unaware. Emma tried to speak, but her throat tightened. The woman leaned closer and whispered something into Daniel's ear. His face drained of color, and the knife slipped from his hand, clattering against the floor. When Emma asked what she had said, Daniel denied hearing anything. But that night, he confessed the truth. She had whispered his full name, along with the exact date and hour of his death. Over the following weeks, Daniel changed. He grew pale, avoided mirrors, and jumped at shadows. He told Emma that every night, when he turned off the lights, he saw the woman from the wedding standing in the corner of the bedroom, smiling. Emma never saw her, but she smelled the same strange perfume, sickly sweet, like rotting flowers. Exactly 6 months later, Daniel was killed in a sudden car accident. His watch stopped at the very hour the woman had whispered. At the funeral, Emma sat numb in the front pew. When she looked up, she froze. Among the mourners, dressed in black lace, was the same woman, smiling directly at her. The family tried to comfort Emma, saying grief makes you see things. But Emma knew the truth, the woman was real. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even human. She was something else, a shadow, a collector, a harbinger. And she wasn't finished. On the night Emma returned home alone, she found a wedding invitation on her dresser. The paper was black, the ink blood red. It read, "You are cordially invited to join your husband in eternity." The date was already circled. And as Emma looked in the mirror, she saw the woman standing behind her, smiling. Sophie loved antiques. She could spend hours wandering through dusty shops, searching for treasures. One autumn afternoon, she stepped into a narrow store tucked between two buildings. It smelled of old books and candle wax. In the back, behind a row of cracked mirrors, she saw it, a wedding dress displayed on a mannequin. It was breathtaking, with shimmering satin and pearl buttons running down the back. The veil cascaded to the floor, its lace intricate and delicate. Sophie touched the fabric and felt a strange chill. The shop owner, a frail woman with pale eyes, appeared silently behind her. "Ah, you found it," she whispered. "The mourning bride's dress." Sophie frowned. "Mourning bride?" The woman smiled thinly. "Legend says the bride who wore it never made it to the altar. Her groom died the night before, crushed by a carriage. They buried her in the gown. But when the coffin was opened years later, the dress was gone. Some say she rose, searching for her love." Sophie laughed nervously. It was just a story. She bought the dress for next to nothing and took it home. That night, she hung it in her bedroom. As she drifted off, she dreamed of a woman weeping, clutching a bloody veil. When she woke, the gown stood at the foot of her bed, though she had left it on a hanger. She brushed it off as sleepwalking. But the next day, strange things continued. Her reflection sometimes wore the gown, even when she wasn't near it. Shadows in the fabric seemed to move. Once, she heard faint whispers, "Where is he? Where is my love?" Her friends mocked her unease, so she wore the gown to show them. As she slipped it on, a crushing sadness overwhelmed her. She sobbed uncontrollably, though she didn't know why. Her friends begged her to take it off, but the buttons refused to come undone. It was as if the dress was holding her captive. Finally, with force, they ripped it off. Her skin beneath was ice cold, marked with faint bruises around her ribs. Terrified, Sophie returned to the antique shop to confront the owner. But the shop was gone. In its place was a boarded-up building covered in dust and cobwebs, as though it had been abandoned for decades. From that night on, the gown haunted her. She would find it draped over her bed, hear footsteps pacing in her room, and smell funeral lilies. Once, she woke to find herself wearing it again, veil covering her face, suffocating her with its weight. Desperate, Sophie tried burning it. The flames roared, but when the smoke cleared, the gown was unharmed. She buried it miles away, but the next night it returned, hanging neatly in her closet. The whispers grew louder. "You are mine now. Until he returns." Sophie realized the spirit inside the gown wasn't searching for her lost groom anymore. It was searching for anyone to share her eternal grief. Her neighbors later reported hearing wails echoing from Sophie's apartment. When the landlord broke in, the room was empty. Only the gown remained, neatly displayed on a mannequin in the center of the room. And if you stand too close, some say you can hear it breathing.